Everyone stand. If you'll go to the book of Proverbs, go to the book of Proverbs even now. Go to the book of Proverbs even now. I want to direct your attention to Proverbs 18. Proverbs 18, verse 16. We began last week in studying the life of Joseph. And we want to pick that up on today and probably carry it out throughout this men's season, because I think there are some things in Joseph's life that profiles for us what it is that we're going through even now. Proverbs 18, verse 16. Let us declare it together. A man's gift maketh room for him and brings him before great men. Come on, declare it again. A man's gift. All right, ask that you will now go to Genesis 41. Genesis 41, verses 39 and 40. I want you to read silently as I read aloud. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. Verse 40. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Your gift will make room for you and bring you before great men. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Amen. Ambassadors, you can let all of our worshipers in now. I want to preach, teach, instruct, impart, using as a theme a new world order. A new world order. Look at the person beside you and say, God is setting up. Look him in the eye. Tell him, God is setting up a new world order, and his plan includes you. If you believe it, I dare you to clap your hands even right now. A new world order. On the eve of elections, our community is presently bombarded with questions. Many ex-felons who are disenfranchised because of past indiscretions want to know why, after paying their debt to society, how come they still don't count? African Americans in this state find themselves torn in this general election as to whether or not they ought to vote for a black Republican or a Jewish Democrat. A black Republican who poses with puppies but hasn't done anything for people. The same man who refused to speak out about integration in a private golf course, using as an excuse, how does it affect him when he doesn't play golf? The same one who did not oppose President Bush during the war in Iraq and has no voting record for us to analyze. While on the flip side, we have a candidate handpicked by the Democratic Party to single-handedly thwart the efforts of Kwesi Mfume when he invested and announced 9 months before his predecessor. Until the winner finds themselves in a place of responsibility, many people on the average street corner, beauty salon, and barbershop are asking themselves, will my vote really make a difference? And will we see a realizable impact from whoever is in that position? In a gubernatorial election, we're forced to ask ourselves, do we still believe? Who's going to make the investment and the sacrifice so that we become a city that reads and not a city that bleeds? Do we want what has happened in the educational system in Baltimore to trickle down into all the schools across the state of Maryland? Who will develop not just waterfront property, but will develop people so that they can own their own property? Is there any real advancement beyond the Inner Harbor and Johns Hopkins so that the people who are living every day trying to in fact just pay BG&E bills will see a difference within their lifetime? How will we see a real impact and difference so that Baltimore does not just become another candidate of baptism for a lost episode of The Wire or The Corner, but that this becomes a city that we can be pleased, proud, and privileged to live in? What governmental practice really speaks to the core and to the synthesis of our people so that we're not just going along with anything that comes along, that they will in fact take our votes for granted or assume that we're not going to vote in the first place? How then do we tell our young people that voting is important when they cannot find appropriately manned polling stations, when they have to deal with pregnant chads, with our own president was not really elected, but found himself summarily placed in office by a brother who is not accountable? How then do we say that the government is really upon the shoulders of God, when in actuality it looks like the shoulders must be slouched because the scripture is becoming slower and slower to bear, that the last will become first when the richer are becoming richer and the poorer are becoming poorer? In Greek, we understand that government literally means to steer or to pilot, which suggests to us that without government, there is chaos and there is no order. Government is supposed to bring a symmetry of understanding and an alignment where there is order. Even when you date back to where it is that Genesis began in the creation story, the Bible shares with us picturesquely that there was nothing and the world was without form and it was void of order. And it was void of order until God spoke. And when God spoke, he created creeping things and flying things and walking things, but none of them had order until he created a man to rule over it in government. He gave him then the treatise of government by saying, you shall have dominion and authority. Do understand, my beloved brothers and sisters, that the original intention of man was that you would in fact have rulership over your own house, that you would have rulership and dominion over everything that you work over. Something is wrong with the modern day body of Christ, where we're no longer looking to be in charge, but we're looking for somebody to be in charge of us. And as a consequence, we have co-opted a welfare mentality, waiting to see when somebody is going to do something for us, rather than us taking ownership and responsibility to do something for ourselves. How is it then, my beloved brothers and sisters, when we live in a city that is 72% black, that there is no moral outcry about the high and alarming homicide rate, that we blame the police department and city hall, but we don't say anything about our own nephews and sons who are the perpetrators until it's somebody in our family that is shot? How is it that we have remained silent when it is that we have 380,000 young people who are in the Baltimore City public school system, but we only have a 45% graduation rate? Where are we going to say something when the average African American student reads 2 grade levels beyond where it is that they are, but they have been socially promoted just to keep them out of the system? But every Sunday we just gather in church to give each other a high five, declare this is my year of supernatural success, shout about a car and about a house and about getting a raise. But who's going to raise the standard of living for the people who live in the community who do not understand that there's got to be a bright side somewhere? How then do we put ourselves in a place for a new government when the government that we are presently living in has in fact failed us? As in fact a degreed political scientist from Morehouse College, I have taken the liberty to canvass what are the governmental options that we can look at. The first one that you have to look at that was in fact established is the government of feudalism. Feudalism by right says that you own when it is, you reign when you own property. This was established during the Middle Ages when agriculture was the key to the economy. So if you owned land, then you ruled. If you owned a significant part of land, then you automatically became a king. And all the land that you lived in and owned became a kingdom. This, my dear friends, causes for us a quintessential problem when it is that the slaveholders understood feudalism, promised us 40 acres and a mule, but did not give us land because they understood that with land comes ownership. This is very important when we live in a city that 64% of African American are renters and not owners, going diabolically against what it is that God has created us to be, because he said you are to be owners and not borrowers. Something is wrong with us when we will go broke and extend our credit for rental furniture, rental television, leased cars, because we don't understand that God created us not to lease or to rent, but to own and to have possession over. So perhaps feudalism does not make sense to you. It was in fact in this caveat, this landscape, that when you owned land, you became hence a landlord. And so you are the Lord over the land that you own. But many of us have found ourselves mired in fiefdoms because we do not own anything. But we are in fact paying rent to somebody who does not care about our well-being. So they will give you notice that rent is getting ready to go up, and with your silly self, rather than looking for a mortgage so that you can own your own home, then you will go to your boss and say, I need a raise to pay more rent to make somebody else my landlord. I didn't expect you to shout today because many of you are renters, but I want to convict you before this service is over. After feudalism, the next level of leadership is dictatorship. And dictatorship is the concept that there is leadership through divine authority, driven by personal ambition or private interests. It can never last forever because any people who are under a dictatorial reign at some point will become bothered with somebody's foot on their neck. How dare you always tell me how I ought to live and how I ought to dress and how I ought to act and how I ought to respond? And you would think that African Americans, after 200 years of being disenfranchised and being redlined, of made to think that they were 3/5 of a human being, would somehow shake it off. How dare we now in 2006 still shout over tokenism because we've got Condoleezza Rice, because we had Colin Powell, but still we are finding ourselves in a welfare mentality and do not understand nobody can tell me how to vote. We've got to tell the Democratic Party, you cannot take my vote for granted. That at some point we've got to have accountability and responsibility. Woe unto a generation that will go into a poll after it was your great-grandparents that were lynched from sycamore trees, that had to deal with fire hoses, that had to sit in the back of the bus, and you got the nerve to not vote because you think that it's not worth it and not going to make a difference, and you stay home and watch Jerry Springer and As the World Turns, not knowing that the world is turning without you. Third level of government after you deal with feudalism and dictatorship is communism. Communism is the theory or the philosophy of controlling the land. It is, in fact, a merging of dictatorship and feudalism by which they put all of the land together and you are not working to be further than anybody else. At its very core, it was the communist intent that they would be able to legislate sharing and love. But you do understand understand that this is a failed principle because you cannot force people to have compassion and to have conviction. It has to be developed. And so you cannot make anybody love you. You cannot make anybody give to you. When you are in a healthy relationship, then you ought not have to threaten anybody to love you by threatening to leave. You ought not threaten anybody to do something for you because you did something for you. But you ought to be so Christ-minded enough that I am loving you not because of who you are. I'm loving you because God first loved me. As a matter of fact, the mandate of Christendom is to love the unlovable. When you look at your own life and your own lifestyle, you've got to step outside of yourself and say, how does God love me with all of my issues, with all of my mess, with all of my failure, with all of my shortcomings? But I can tell some of you come to church puffed up as if you think that God is doing you a favor by blessing you. But when you know who you really are, I'm not talking about how you pretend to be in church, but I'm talking about who you are on Friday night and who you are on Saturday afternoon. But God still wakes you up every morning. You got to say, favor is not fair. His grace and his mercy propel me to love. You may be seated. Then you deal with socialism. Socialism is where power is taken away from people and is given to the state. Where the state is, in fact, the central vein for existence. And so you do not live for yourself, but you live for the institution. The problem with many modern day churches is that many churches no longer live to equip people, but churches nowadays are now in existence to keep the standard of the institution. So we will spend money to buy buses and to renovate buildings and for fresh coats of paint and to put in new stained glass windows when people's lives are breaking down. I would rather be in a storefront church where people are coming off drugs and coming off the street corner than being in a multi-million-dollar sanctuary where folk are just trying to be cute and bougie, but their life is like hell. I don't know where you are, but I wish that we could get to a place where we would stop pretending and being superficial and say, I'm bleeding, I'm hurting, there's something broken on the inside, and if church is my last stop, don't let me come to church just to hear some song and to hear some poem. Give me the tools so my life can change. You may be seated. Last level of governmental structure deals with democracy. A democracy Plato calls the fairest of all constitutions, by which every man has a voice and has a vote. In theory, it sounds good, but it is, in fact, the rule of for the people, by the people, and of the people. If democracy is, in fact, what they say it is, that it is of the people, for the people, and by the people, then please tell me why 73% of all U.S. senators are self-made millionaires. Please tell me why it is that in order for you to run a congressional election, you have to have at least $7 to $10 million. What about the single mother who learned how to balance a budget? What about a brother who knows how to make things right when he's gone through a welfare on his own? Can I tell you that the greatest people who have a voice and can lend some expertise and talent may not have the finances, but they have the faith? God help me, there's somebody who's sitting in here right now that if you would get the job, you would do better than O'Malley, Schaefer, Smoke. Y'all ain't talking back to me. But because you have not been a part of the governmental system, nobody has given you the chance. I'm so glad that when I started serving God, that God made me to understand that he's not about democracy, he's about kingdom. And the reason why he's about kingdom is because he wanted me to know that when I put you in office, folk cannot vote you out. And the reason why it is that you ought to shout today is because if you had to wait for folk to vote on your favor, you would never be elected. If you had to campaign to get to where you are, you would never be in your rightful position. But because you serve a God who looks beyond haters, looks beyond your budget, looks beyond your degree, looks beyond your issues, you ought to say, Lord, thank you for seeing greatness in me when other folk didn't see it. Proverbs chapter 18, verse number 16 says, your gift will make room for you and bring you in the company of great men. There is, in fact, a new world order that I'm believing that the Lord is getting ready to introduce to this generation and to this dispensation. That order of government is what I want to call meritocracy. Meritocracy is a group of people who are elevated based off of their gift and based off of their talent. It has nothing to do with privilege or wealth, but just because they have a gift, they are elevated. I can tell some of you are slow. Maybe I'm going too fast. 7:30 in the morning, but I want you to understand that the shifting that the Lord is getting ready to put in operation, God is getting ready to elevate some people just because you are gifted. God, I know I ain't talking to everybody, but I wish I had about 200 of you who know that it is now your season. You've been watching other folk go past you. You've been watching other folk move to the other line, but you didn't say anything. You weren't jealous. You didn't become bitter. You didn't become a hater, but you wanted to know, God, when are you going to do something for me? God said, I had to let you go through a season of watching other folk get blessed because I wanted you to see that when I bless you, it's not because you slept with anybody. It's not because you brown nosed. It's not because you kissed up. It's just because there's a gift inside of you. I don't know where you are, but I'm only preaching to gifted people who know that this is the year that God is going to allow the gift he's put in me to make room for me. Be seated. I got no contacts, but I'm gifted. I don't know anybody in City Hall, but I'm gifted. I didn't pay my dues the traditional way, but I'm gifted. Somebody just shout, I'm gifted. I'm gifted. You may be seated. You may be seated. Let me work my text just a little bit. You may be seated. Just elbow your neighbor. Say, make room for me. Megger, you sitting too close up on me. You need to make room for me. My gift is getting ready to make room. God is getting ready to put me in places I never thought, dreamed, or imagined. I'm too gifted. When you study, when you study the life of Joseph, you'll see where Joseph goes through every level of governmental structure that has failed him. He goes through every level of structure that has failed him. Here it is. His father puts a coat on him, and the coat of many colors represents favor. This is very strange because in your inheritance, in Jewish Hebraic tradition, you should not get an inheritance of a coat. You should get an inheritance of land. But his father does not give him land because he does not want him to become engaged in feudalism. He doesn't want him to think that the parameters of your authority is just in the land you own, but the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The reason why there are so many people who are unnerved by you is because you refuse to stay in your jurisdiction. They think you ought to just stay in the place, in the area where you got a degree. They think you ought to just stay in the area that everything your family used to do. But do not allow anybody to keep you in a box. God said, wherever you place your foot, that's where your anointing is. So you can be anointed at your old job, but you're going to be just as anointed when you get to your new job. You were anointed when you had a man. Now you're still anointed by yourself. God said, no matter where you are, there isn't a favor on your life. He said, I had to disrupt feudalism. His brother gave him an assignment. His father gave him an assignment. Go see how your brothers are doing. He went to go check on his brothers, and so now he's operating of the vain government of dictatorship. To tell them what to do. But any people who are frustrated by a dictator will overturn the government. And so they're upset that here he is, the youngest with favor on his life, trying to tell me what to do, and they throw him in a pit. Can I tell you that there are so many people who are upset with you just because you got favor on you? You'll notice this, that Joseph does not own land. He does not have money. The only thing that they hate him for is because of the favor that's on his life. I want you to understand you only got one or two options. Get people to like you without favor, or get them to understand you can hate me, but I'm keeping my favor. So even when folk don't like you, you ought to be able to celebrate. Listen, I ain't gonna take nothing for the favor that's on my life. If you don't want to be my friend, fine. You don't want to speak to me, watch me keep on living. But I got to keep the favor of God. He gets to his brothers, and now he goes into the vein of government of communism and says, all of you will work for me. You're going to have the same portion, have the same title. But you have to understand, you cannot legislate people to love. You cannot legislate people to obey. You can't legislate people to fall in line. But now he finds himself in prison. And when he finds himself in prison, he finds himself as the lot of many black men in Baltimore. Because he has in fact served time for a rape charge. He has now summarily lost his right to vote. He is now disenfranchised, and so democracy is not an option. But I like the story of Joseph, because I'm so glad his life did not end in jail. But the Bible records for us that while he's in jail, he develops a gift, and his gift is to interpret dreams. And while he's in jail, he interprets the dream of a cupbearer and of a baker. But that's not good enough. He says, when you get out of here, just in case you get out before me, remember me. Well, the baker goes off and dies, but the cupbearer gets his position next to the king. And the Bible records that for 2 years, he forgets all about Joseph. Can I tell somebody this, that so many times you will help somebody with their dream, but when their dream comes to pass, they'll forget the people who were with them when they didn't have anything. You don't need no new friends to show up after you bless. I want to know, who was the folk holding me down when I was in a cursed place? Who was my friend when I was broke? Who had my back when I didn't feel like coming to church? You don't even understand why I'm shouting now, because you don't know what I came from. But if you saw the nights that I spent and the days that I didn't know where I was going to, you won't watch me shout, but you'll shout with me, saying, I remember what they came from. 2 years passed, and he forgot all about Joseph. Forgot about Joseph until the king has a dream. The king has a dream, and he has two in one night. And he's frustrated. I can't make out my dream. It don't make sense to me. He said, bring me the professors from the University of Jerusalem. I said, brought all of them. They're tenured, they're lettered, they're degreed, they're published, but they can't interpret the dream. So get me that radio preacher who's selling prayer cloth and oil. Bring him to me. I'll give him $1,000. Yeah, can't see anything. Give me that parking lot prophetess who prophesying about everybody else's life, but can't see her own children going crazy, and her whole life is in shambles. And he's frustrated. He's frustrated because nobody who's got degrees, nobody who's got title, nobody who is published, nobody who's got tenure can help him with his dream. And the cupbearer
says, I've made a terrible mistake. I know somebody who's gifted, who can interpret the dream for you. Says, is he a professor at Harvard? No. Does he have a book contract? No. Is he on the lecture circuit? No. Has he been on TBN? No. Where is the one that can help me with my dream? He said, King, before I tell you about him, I want you to understand he don't look the part. He don't have church clothes. He don't know all of the praise songs, but I want you to know he's gifted. And I like what the king says. I don't care what he's been through. I don't care what he was charged with. If he's got a gift, bring him to me. And I rose this morning to tell somebody that the king is looking for somebody who he can use to make the dream come to pass. He said, I don't care if you've been locked up. I don't care if you had a divorce. I don't care if you had a child out of wedlock. Bring me your gift and see if I don't work your gift. The Bible says they bring Joseph to the king. And the king says, I never met somebody as gifted as you. Joseph's eyes begin to water because he thinks about his own family who didn't believe in his gift. He's frustrated because now that he's been in jail, Potiphar's wife don't think he attractive no more. He thinks about the folk in church who never wrote him, never came to visit him, never even sent him a Bible. But now that he's been through something, he says, here I am in front of the king, and folk want to know, how did I get here? You don't have a resume. You didn't have a writing sample. You didn't have a letter of recommendation. How did you get in the presence of the king? And Joseph had to look him in the eye and tell him, I didn't kiss up. I didn't play politics. My gift made room for me, and I came to declare to this house that the Lord is going to put you in the presence of important people if you just let your gift. The new world order is meritocracy. That you are going to be rewarded because you are gifted. I don't know where you are, but hear this. When they brought him out of jail, he made up in his mind, I'm never going back. Hear this. When the king brings you out, listen for a sound. The sound is for the door slamming behind you. He says, when I put a call on your life, when I take you out of something, you ain't ever going back to God. Help me. I wish I had 500 people in the building who just heard in your spirit a door just shut. So many times we shout about doors being open, but you ought to shout that door, God just shut a door that you can never go back. So because of your gift, you ain't ever going back to living like that. You ain't ever going back to not being celebrated. You are never going back where you got to worry about other people's opinion. He said, when I set you up in this position, know that you don't owe nobody but me. He said, I had to keep you in it long enough so that when you got out of it, you knew your family didn't bail you out. You knew that it was not because of some good lawyer. The only reason you got out of it is because of the king. So when I shout, it don't matter to me whether you roll your eyes and suck your teeth. I know you wasn't the one that brought me out, but it was the king. Stand to your feet. How did I get this job? How did I get this position? How I get to this place? Your gift made room for you. I need you to just look at somebody and say, move over, move over. Move over, move over. My gift is making room for me right now. I'm sick of being crowded and boxed in. My gift. Everyone is standing. You can be gifted and not supported. You can be gifted and wounded. You can be gifted and falsely accused. You can be gifted and lonely. Joseph went through all of that. But no matter what place he was in, his gift kept making room. And in case you didn't hear anything else I told you this morning, I want you to know that even while you're sitting in this sanctuary, your gift is making room for you. It is. It is not making room for where you are. It's making room for your next position. Everywhere Joseph went, the next place got better. Oh, I don't know where you are today, but can I tell you this? I hope you don't miss your shout. Your next position gonna be better than this. Your next place is gonna be better than this. God just want to see if you'll remember your gift when you're in a shackled place. Would you lift your hands right where you are?